Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Darla. I'm the Executive Director of Peace Northwest, and I just wanted to welcome you today. We are so thrilled to have Erin Dixon here talking about community inclusion. Erin is the Executive Director of Community Employment Alliance, which is a network of all of our employment vendors from around the state. And I know that is being the executive director of that group is a really hard position and you have to have a lot of skills. So we're thrilled to have Erin here and I'm going to pass it over to him. And yeah, thanks, Erin.
Yeah, thanks so much, Darla, and thanks for the introduction. And I will say one other piece about CEA, Community Employment Alliance, that is relevant to this conversation is that we also represent community inclusion as well. And so that's why we're part of this conversation. And so I believe 27 of the provider organizations in our coalition provide community inclusion services. And I will say too, I personally, before taking on this role, worked at a provider as a job coach and also doing community inclusion services. I've also been a caregiver. I also worked at and then later ran a respite summer camp for 10 years. And so I've kind of touched all different parts of our system in different ways. So I will say I am very open to questions, interruptions, chat box, whatever people want to do. So I'm happy to have this be very informal and casual. So please feel free to jump in if you want to ask questions. So I want to kind of talk about two things today. So first off, I want to talk a little bit about community inclusion, since I know that's a big topic right now with 1158, that bill that would be changing community inclusion services. So I'm going to start with that. And then at the end, I'm also going to talk a little bit about our bill, which is 1493, that relates to lowering the age of eligibility for employment and community inclusion services.
Erin, can you also do an overview of what community inclusion is? Because a lot of people may not know.
That's exactly where I was going to start. So great segue. First off, community inclusion services. Uh, oh, and I can let people in the room because I'm a co-host. Okay. So community inclusion services are a service where we support people to engage out in the community on an individualized level. And so what that could look like is we'll meet with someone and try to figure out what they as an individual want to do out in the community. Just an example from real life off the top of my head. Someone that I worked with really wanted to do something related to Star Wars, which is a little challenging, but we're like, all right, we'll work with that. And so uh, we kind of mapped out the community, tried to find out what we had in our community that was somehow related to Star Wars, and we did eventually find a lightsaber club that existed where people would get lightsabers and, have kind of pretend battles with the lightsabers. And with what we did then is we helped this person to integrate into that already existing community activity that was happening. And then as a staff person, our job is to really support the person to build relationships with other people and not to be the primary relationship with the person. So that's really built into the training for this service is that, and not that there's anything wrong with being friends with your staff, but for this service, the goal is that, the staff's job is to really support you to build those relationships out in the community. And then as those relationships build to kind of back off at whatever level is appropriate for the person. So, backing off maybe, instead of being 2 feet away, maybe I'm 10 feet away so that you can kind of have your conversation with your new friend that you're making without me kind of my presence getting in the way. And if someone's, capable of this, it may also look like us leaving 10 minutes early, or maybe getting to the point where we're not even there anymore because the person has fully integrated into whatever the activity is. And what's kind of cool about that then is with the service hours that we have, if we have been able to fade, is what we call it, and kind of not need to be around as much anymore, then we can use those service hours to then go find another opportunity for that person in the community and kind of build from there. And so I think some kind of key parts of the service, for one, it's individualized. So it's not a group-based service. And so we really start from what do you want to do? And it's kind of similar to employment in that sense that it really is based on that individualized, model. So, what do you want to do? We're going to go find that for you as best we can. Uh, it's also community based in that we are finding what already exists in the community and trying to integrate people into it. And so part of what I think is really unique about this service is that, I think the benefits to the community are really important. That, this is an opportunity for people with disabilities to engage in their communities in a way that's really fully integrated. And just to kind of offer a contrast, I mean, I used to run a summer camp that was a respite summer camp and, loved it. I will rave about it all day. But just to kind of show the contrast and why the community inclusion service is a separate, distinct service is that, we would, for example, take our campers to go to a lake and would go have a whole lake day, and it was really fun and really lovely. But for the most part, we kind of hung out with each other and didn't really build relationships with other community members, which, it is what it is. It's fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing by any means, but what's really different about the community inclusion service is that it's really designed to encourage those relationships with other community members that, in my experience, often don't naturally happen for people with disabilities in the community. And so I think there's this really cool benefit, not just to the individual, but to the rest of society to have really staff that are trained to help bridge that gap between people with and without disabilities to build those relationships. And so that's kind of the brief-ish version of what it is. And so one other thing I'll mention too is that it can be used for volunteering and it can also be used for activities. So it could be, volunteering at the Humane Society, but it could also be joining an art club or a lightsaber club. I know someone, does it rock climbing with that, and they, set up where they had a bunch of other community members kind of trade. I never remember the term, but where you're the support person for the person who's rock climbing. So kind of doing that and building those relationships. Uh, so that's the community inclusion service. And so 1158, what the impact would be. So one is that it would change it from an individual service to a group-based service. And in our organization, we are opposed to that, not necessarily because we're opposed to any group-based services at all. Again, I loved the summer camp that I worked at, but the community inclusion service is designed as an individualized service for a reason and has been built for several decades on, models of individualized services, like I described. And so we feel that that change would kind of fundamentally change the point of the program, as well as changing kind of the impact that it has on community members and that chance to really build individualized relationships with people with disabilities. So that's one piece. And then there's also the role of the counties, which I know is also kind of a big topic that a lot of people might not know kind of the full picture of what that relationship is. And so the counties, so for both supported employment and community inclusion services, the counties are kind of the contractors, you could say. So DDA contracts with the counties to then contract with providers for those services, whereas with other services like respite and community engagement, there's a direct DDA contracting with providers relationship. And the counties do a lot of different things. So I think first and foremost, a lot of their role is on quality assurance and focusing on outcomes for those services. And part of the reason why it was set up that way is because supported employment and community inclusion are a lot more goal focused than other services, which again, that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just a different thing. But there's more of a focus on, if you are looking for a job, for example, with employment, where you say, I want to work at a grocery store for 10 hours a week, and then the job that you end up getting is only 3 hours a week and it's, watering plants or something, the counties might kind of step in and say, hey, like this doesn't really align with the goals that this person had. So why don't we figure out a plan for how we can make this work with what the person's goals were? So, I that's a good example. Or same like if your goal is, Star Wars related and you end up hanging out at like a book club, maybe, well, I guess there's Star Wars books, but, I don't know, with plants, let's say, a plant club, again, the, quality assurance piece might be, hey, like this doesn't really seem like what this person wanted. So can we figure out how we can make this happen? So, there's quality assurance for that individualized focus for the services. Whereas, like with community engagement services, for example, which are not run through the counties, there's not really, there's not as many requirements of it being goal focused. So, for example, if someone wanted to use that service to, go on, go mall walking, or just go on a walk with their staff outside their house down the street every day, that is something that would be totally fine in that service. And again, I really want to emphasize like it's not good or bad or that one's better or worse, but they're different services for different reasons. And I think that's really the point of where we are have concerns about this bill is that, these services were set up with different intentions for a reason and to meet different needs. And, we want to make sure that those differences are understood by people who are thinking about this bill and how they feel about it. And so, some other things. So again, that's kind of the big one is the quality assurance piece. But other roles that the counties have, they do a lot of language access work and kind of like helping to fund translation for people and reaching out to different communities from different cultural backgrounds and kind of supporting providers with how to work with different populations. They also do a lot of work with developing new providers and trying to increase the pool of providers in communities and resources to help with staffing and with capacity and that sort of thing, as well as outreach to families and people with disabilities. So they'll do a lot of information fairs, transitions fairs for students who are exiting their school programs, um, and that sort of thing. Also, they'll implement certain new services. So the School to Work program originated as a project in King County with their systems. So they have different projects like that they work on as well. And then also there's support for certain parent groups and county advisory boards and that sort of thing. So they cover a lot of different things. And again, the way this bill is currently written, if that change was to happen, a lot of those services may potentially not be able to continue. We do know that DDA has shared that they don't currently have capacity to take on what the counties are currently doing. So that is something that we are concerned about. So, and that comes from leadership at DDA that we have heard that. So. Let's see, where else do I want to go with this? Sorry, need to get my notes together because there's a million different things to say about all of this. Oh, okay. And then the other piece as well relates to kind of service hours directly with a person versus not. And so for that, again, this very much relates to kind of the intention of the service and the, outcome-based, goal-focused, uh, you know, way that this service and supported employment, because it's similar with that service as well, how they function. That, for example, if someone is let's say, well, I mean, if someone's looking for, getting involved with something to do with Star Wars, again, real example, this individual that I worked with was not comfortable going out and networking with people. And so that is how we were able to use this service. So it's not to say that we always inherently don't include the person, but it is an option for when it makes sense for the person. And that's part of it being that individualized service. And so, I was able to go and initially meet the person who runs the club, talk to them about what we're doing, kind of check in about accessibility and make sure that they would be prepared to have someone with a developmental disability join their group and that that would go well. And, maybe provide a little information or even a little disability etiquette training if that was needed, and then bring the person in and go from there. Uh, so I think in general, part of why that's important for a service like this is that if you are doing, again, like the summer camp I worked at, a group-based service, uh, you know, there's not as much planning that goes into we're going to bring all 50 people to the lake as there is compared to someone has expressed an interest in Star Wars, which, I didn't already have any relationships with, Star Wars related things myself. So, it takes more time and intention to kind of set things up when it's an individualized service like that. And so again, I think the important thing to take away here is that as it is needed, it is allowed to do things on behalf of someone. But with the training that we receive in our services for both community inclusion and supported employment, it's strongly encouraged to include the person as much as possible. So if the person is capable and interested in going to do the initial networking to go meet the person who runs the Star Wars Club, we absolutely do that all the time with people. Same with supported employment. I have brought many people to go door to door and give resumes or meet people and talk about the person's skills and interests. And there are some people who would absolutely hate that and would absolutely refuse to do that. So it gives us that flexibility to really meet the person where they're at and support them how they need to be supported. Uh, okay, and then the last part relates to personal care. And so this is one where uh, you know, we see the need and we would like to figure this out, but the way it's written in the bill, we have concerns about. And so what I will say about this is that we are currently in meetings with DDA on how to address this issue and are working on kind of exactly what needs to go into figuring this out. But it's actually a fairly complex issue. So I've been in my role for a little over a year at this point, and pretty much from day one, this issue was right at the forefront. And we've talked about it at our two conferences that I've been to. Again, we've had a lot of conversations with DDA about it. And part of where it's challenging is that there's a lot of conversation around what does training look like? What are the requirements? Who would provide that? Who would pay for it to make sure that people can be safe if they're going to be transferred? I would want people to have skills in that, if they're going to do that. There's also concerns about liability and how that's written in. So, it's not just as simple as, well, you can just go do it right now, because if there's nothing written into our structure about liability and what happens if there is something that goes wrong, that does make people concerned. So we want to address that and make sure that that's addressed appropriately to keep everyone safe. And then, yeah, and then again, I think also too, there's a lot of different laws and rules. So WACS, for those who know WACS, Washington Administrative Code, that goes into how this stuff works. So, just in the last month or two, I've been working closely with DDA to figure out what all of those RCWs and WACS are. I've been working on a lot of relationship building to understand the different pieces of the different systems. So there's the Community First Choice Personal Care Program that is needing to be engaged in this because there's a lot of overlap in how these would, the service would be provided. And so And then also too, there's the difference as well of, how this works with someone who lives at home with their parents versus at an adult family home versus in supported living. And there's different rules and regulations for all of those different systems and how they engage with each other. So again, we want to make this happen and we are actively working on it. But the way this bill is written doesn't really cover all of the nuance. It's a little too simplified. And so we do appreciate that part of it, but we just want to make sure that it's done intentionally and thoroughly, which we are actively working on ourselves. Uh, so that's that, Bill. So I'll stop for questions before I keep going.
Thank you, Aaron. I have one question that I think I know the answer to, but I just want to make sure. Currently on CI, um, it can be up to 3 people that go out. So, like if somebody had a friend and they wanted to go do Star Wars stuff together, they could go together and the provider would provide that service, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
And does the provider currently provide transportation?
No, that's not currently built into the system.
Okay.
Yeah, and which is also a huge problem that we would like to address as well.
Yeah. Other questions, guys? Teresa?
Thank you. I'm sorry I missed the first few minutes, so this may have been shared, but it's my understanding that the CI activity has to be in a group setting. Is that accurate? Or if it's in the community, can it be like, is that something that can be planned out?
Good question. And so, again, the intention of the service is building relationships with other people in the community that aren't your staff person. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like a large group or anything like that. It could be one other person, two other people, but it can't just be alone with your staff, since that's not the intention of the service, because the point is those relationships with community members.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm understanding, like an example would be the person wouldn't necessarily have to be on a bowling league for that to be their goal, but they could have a goal that they want to be able to go bowling independently in the community and engage with the folks there.
I think that would probably be fine. Yeah. And again, that's where that kind of quality control piece comes in, is that we would want to make sure that the staff person is intentionally kind of trying to encourage interacting with other people and building relationships. But I think that would probably be fine that way.
Okay.
Generally what we want to avoid with this service, again, specifically with community inclusion, is, the person bowling just with their staff and never interacting with anyone else at all.
Right.
Again, it's like that's not necessarily a bad thing for other services, but this service, the focus is on that relationship building and having support to be able to do that.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have a question too. So I'm thinking like, for example, places like a rural area where there might not be necessarily events or support or places that, and
Mhm.
if an individual wants to create a group or something, can they get support in doing the thing like, posting on social media or creating a flyer or that kind of thing?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up. So that's one thing that I really love about this service is that's one of the things that we're trained on is, go try to find it. And if you can't find it, build it and see if you can get other people to show up. So that's absolutely something that we do.
And I'm new to this service. But can you tell me what age group then you provide? Like what's the minimum age group to the maximum?
Mhm. Yep. And that's a great segue to my next topic, actually. So currently 21 or older and no age limit on the upper end. So there previously used to be an age limit, but that was removed several years ago. Yeah.
Thanks.
So, Aaron, if somebody wanted to start a group and they're not currently in community inclusion, right?
Mhm.
But they qualify for it, they could ask for it to help set that up.
Yeah, I believe so. And you would just ask your case manager.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yep. And so I see I'm a little short on time. So just to briefly segue, so I glad you actually just brought that up about the age that so currently, like I said, to access both community inclusion and supported employment through DDA, you have to be 21 or older. And so we are running a bill this session to lower that to 19 with a longer term goal to get that down to 15 or 16, especially since I know I got my first job when I was 15. I think that's pretty typical for people without disabilities to start around 15 or 16. And we want to make sure that the full range of supports are in place for that if somebody wants that. And kind of the main questions that we've gotten about that is, people will say, well, aren't, transitions programs a thing? Like, aren't they supposed to do that? And in my experience, there are a handful of exceptions, but generally transitions programs really focus on internships, often group-based internships, and they will do in-class, learning about interviewing skills, soft skills, I don't know, like dress codes, that sort of thing. But if somebody wants to get an evening or a weekend job, the school isn't going to support that with a staff person. And so that's where we really want to make sure that we can come in so that, again, if you have two kids and your kid without a disability goes and gets a job at 16 and their sibling sees that and wants to go and do that too when they're 16 and they have a disability, we want the supports there to make sure that they can do that. And so that's kind of the simple version, but I've done a lot of background work to make sure that it wouldn't be considered a duplication of services and have confirmed that there's at least 15 other states that do it in a way that would align with what we're trying to do. So there shouldn't be a concern there. So that would be for both employment, but then also community inclusion would also be lowered as well so that people could access that for their weekends and evenings while they're even still in school. So,
Excellent.
yep.
Can
And
you
that's,
can you
House-
repeat the name of the bill again? Like
yes.
the
So,
number?
it's House Bill 1493, and it's lowering the age of eligibility for DDA, supported employment, and community inclusion from 21 to 19. I've tried to find a way to say that more quickly, but what are you gonna do? Any questions about that or anything
What are
else?
the action items that community members can take if they are like, this sounds like a great idea?
Yeah, so at this point we have our bill, but we don't have a commit or a hearing for it yet. So the main action at this point would be to reach out to members of the House Human Services Committee to ask for a hearing, especially Steve Berquist, who's the chair of the Human Services Committee, but any of them would do. So that's kind of the current step in the process.
Is there a Senate companion bill?
Not yet. We are hoping we might get one, but we're not sure if we will.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Right on the
Well,
dot.
yeah, I will say if there's no other questions, I just want to say I'm super happy to, talk to anyone, phone call, Zoom meeting. I'm always very happy to share what I know and support whatever efforts that you're all working on. And I will say too, I just am super grateful to have the opportunity to come and talk to all of you. I have really wanted to be really intentional about reaching out to, everyone that I can in the disability community, and parents are a really big part of that. And I have so much respect for what you all do, and especially those of you who are really involved in advocacy and, just trying to make the lives of people with disabilities better. I see that, and I appreciate you all, and really am glad to have had the opportunity. So thank you.
We really appreciate you coming, Aaron. And if there's anything we can do now that we have those questions answered to support either of the bills or anything you guys are working on, we'd be happy to do that. So
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate that.